We want to talk about a number of things that are happening in the United States at the moment. Of course, the election and Donald Trump and the COVID crisis that's sweeping across America. The man we go to as normal is Professor Greg Barton. He's the research professor and chair of global Islamic politics at the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalisation. I know it's a mouthful, Greg, but it's important that we give you the proper title and moniker. Welcome back to The Informer.
Thank you, George, and thank you for taking the time with the title. I'm sure that my institute will appreciate it.
Let's discuss this upcoming US presidential election. Already we've seen a whole lot of noise, we've seen all manner of antics, and we've had the debate of all debates, and people are still talking about it. What have you made of it?
Look, people talk about not trusting the polls, and the last 5 years have been very chastening. The 2016 race, of course, we didn't expect that Trump would win the nomination, much less the presidency. And although the odds were long, we should have seen it more plainly. This time around, it's true at times the lead that Joe Biden has matched the lead that Hillary Clinton has had at the same time in the same place. But the difference is there's been much more consistency in the polls throughout this year's presidential race. And just lately, the last few weeks, Joe Biden has steadily opened up his position, particularly since that disastrous debate. I think it was disastrous for Trump and good for Biden. The drama that you couldn't script, couldn't make it up if you tried, with the White House going down with COVID-19, the president being medevaced to Walter Reed and then storming back in triumph for a balcony address, that seems to have actually damaged him. I mean, the polls may turn around, they may yet tighten up, but that consistency, including across the key battleground states and even the key counties in the key battleground states, does really suggest that Joe Biden is going to certainly comfortably win the majority of votes and almost certainly win the majority of electoral college votes. Maybe a landslide, maybe closer, but the caveat is that the college system is so unpredictable. And it varies from state to state with really arcane rules in many cases that it's still possible for an upset. But at this stage, Trump seems to be his own worst enemy. I think that is clear. His campaigning has been very poor, except for making himself and his base happy. He's not extended his base at all.
What do you make with the last few days where we saw this, the president go into hospital, the Walter Reed military hospital, no less, with signs that he had become positive to COVID?
Look, I mean, my position is subjective, as are all of our positions. But at the beginning of the Trump presidency, he looked like he might be, the number 45 president might be the worst at least in modern history. The events of 2020 and his failure to take leadership and responsibility with the COVID-19 pandemic seem to confirm our worst fears. And the last few weeks just seem to have really topped it off. One might have thought that he had all sorts of misgivings or shortcomings that could be forgiven in terms of experience, never been elected office, etc. And it's difficult to pin home the blame for handling a pandemic to the federal government when so much depends on the states. But his brazen disregard for the well-being and health of his closest friends and family and colleagues is incredible. We still don't know when Trump had his last negative COVID test. Jake Tapper has been reporting in recent hours that it looks very likely that Trump himself got COVID-19 at that Rose Garden event to announce the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett. And that suggests that he was infectious at the time of the presidential debate, either knew it or at least failed to get proper testing. And then, of course, went to a private meeting with people who paid a lot of money to meet with him at Bedminster at his resort, risking their lives. These are elderly people. And then, and then, of course, his reports from Walter Reed, the trip back to the White House, the bizarre motorcade victory lap outside Walter Reed, the failure to mention even his wife or other family or colleagues, the failure to acknowledge that 210,000 Americans have been officially confirmed as having died of COVID-19, real number probably getting closer to 300,000. It's just incredible. So in a sense, no surprises. It's just that our worst fears have been confirmed.
We had two people say to me over the last couple of days, I can't believe the quality of candidates that are available for both parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. You said Joe Biden looks pretty strong, but I thought at times during that debate he was almost about to topple over.
Well, I think that's the key point. Had he toppled over, literally or metaphorically during the debate, that would have been disastrous. That was the fear. That was where the bar was set for Joe Biden. All he had to do was turn up, be reasonably coherent in a Joe Biden sort of clumsy way, not rise to the bait of provocations from Trump, and get across some of his key points. And he did all of that. Not like a Barack Obama, not like even many other of his primary race colleagues. He did it as Joe Biden has always done it, in this clumsy, gaffe-prone way. But he was standing up. He wasn't provoked. He was calm. He got across his key points, and that was all people were expecting. So I know it's low expectations, and to frame it in a larger context, my expectation for a Joe Biden administration, should it eventuate, is that it'll be a team of competent people, many of them smarter and more competent than the president himself, and the president will be comfortable working with them. And that's a vast sight better than what we've had with this current administration. So Joe Biden, yes, is the weak link. We're stuck with what we've got. As Trump himself would say, it is what it is. It's tempting to blame the American system. It's a bizarre system, but have a look at Great Britain. I dare say, George, have a look at Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. I do want to talk to you about Julian Assange and the latest attempt on his life. What have you made of that? That came out of nowhere.
Look, I just think it's an incredibly sad case. To be fair, I should be upfront and say I haven't followed everything as closely as many have. I've always been critical of Julian Assange. I think he's, there's a lot to criticize about him, what he's done, and his behaviour since. But he deserves, as every human being, and certainly every Australian citizen from the Australian government, deserves due process of justice. He deserves proper consular support and the intervention of his government. I think it would be a travesty of justice if he was extradited to the US. We know that they want to make an example of him. I understand the sentiment, but that doesn't justify the miscarriage of justice. So I just think we're seeing a terribly tragic unfolding drama with Julian Assange. He deserves more help. He deserves criticism. There'll be plenty of time in history for that. But he deserves help and he deserves justice at this point, not for himself, but also for the larger issues that he was, in his own flawed way, trying to highlight.
I agree with you, and here. Something else I want to talk to. It's really been a sad time overseas, especially when we talk about geopolitics. Can we touch on the hostilities that have broken up between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the disputed Artsakh region, which has seen Turkey suddenly decide, Erdogan has decided that he's going to step in and help President Aliyev against the Armenians. For goodness sake, what's going on?
I think the short answer is we don't know the full story of it. It's been sometimes framed as Turkey ending up in conflict, sort of proxy war conflict with its recent friend Russia. I don't think that's quite true. There is a longer and consistent pattern of antipathy between Turkey and Armenia. Sadly, I mean, under President or Prime Minister, as it was at the time, Erdogan, there was a lot of rapprochement with Armenia. So it's, as with the Kurds in Turkey itself, it's sad to see progressive advances thrown away for what one would have to assume is a personal power calculation of Erdogan himself, as well as a sort of a deep visceral, you have to say hatred of the Armenians, at least a sort of a deep prejudice. That deep prejudice doesn't explain the current events, but it sort of explains why they've glided so quickly and so easily in Turkish politics. There's the other factor of Iran. The great rivalry in the region, of course, is really between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and of course on Saudi Arabia's side, America and its allies, and on Iran's side, oddly enough, lately Russia, and that's played out in Syria and Iraq. So this seems to be a genuinely local conflict with local drivers, but being played out in the context of power politics and proxy contestation The Turkish position is the sort of more clear position to understand. Beyond that, it's extremely murky.
What do you make of the media trying to make sense of it? I mean, you've got a good grasp of it. They are struggling. They can't. I think they're trying to paint it as black and white, and it isn't.
No, I think for the greater Middle East, and this is sort of beyond the edges of the Middle East, but to put it in that sort of broader context, it's not unique to the greater Middle East, but we tend to struggle with things that we haven't been following, that are complex, that involve lots of local factors, often deep history, but often sort of very recent developments. And we fall back on simplistic tropes. So we talk about Shia-Sunni rivalry in the Middle East, which is often very mistaken, or even Christian-Muslim rivalry. We try and explain things in the language often of the politicians involved in terms of ancient conflicts, when in fact for the people on the ground, it's often, more recent decades that have shaped things, or even sort of more immediate drivers. I think we have to accept the fact, George, that sometimes things are just very complicated, and there are multiple things going on, multiple players with different motivations, and people who are caught up in the emotion of circumstances that are pretty traumatic, who don't even really know why they're doing what they're doing. Of course, we talk about militaries and conscripted service people, they're following orders, they're doing what they're told, but often there's machinations with leadership above them. We'll get a clearer picture in time, but there's no simple explanation for this.
Professor Greg Barton is our guest in the studio, and we've talked all manner of things. We've talked about the American presidential election, about the behaviour between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. We've also touched on Assange and, of course, the hostilities that have broken out between Armenia and Azerbaijan. It's, as you touched on, Greg, very complex. It's not black and white. It's an issue that needs to be addressed. And I think it's going to require the help of all the superpowers, and even distracted America and Russia. What do you think?
I think there's no question, George. I think we need to, first of all, accept that Julian Assange's case needs to be dealt with justice and transparency, and there's no basis in a great degree of danger, not to mention miscarriage of justice, in making it some sort of show trial. That's just unacceptable. The issues that came up and the way they came up, they also need to be addressed. And we can separate out any criticism of the way that WikiLeaks functioned from the issues that it revealed. They're two separate things, and we need to face up to that. Perhaps a new administration in Washington, different than this current Trump administration, may open the way for doing some of those things. I don't expect miracles. I know that there's a lot of inertia and a lot of vested interests, but the last few years have just been awful.
And what about the world? Who can actually find some solution for the challenges that are going on at the moment on the border between Artsakh and Azerbaijan and Armenia and Turkey?
Well, once again, this is a case where a more active and more engaged America and a more engaged European community could make a really vital contribution, both working together. I mean, neither the EU nor America have any direct business in that region, but together they're so powerful and so influential and can be so helpful that they can play that circuit breaker and honest broker role, which we haven't seen them playing for a long time. Absent EU and America, we're left with Russia, Turkey, and Iran. And given the history of Syria and Iraq and the conflict there and the proxy wars and the vested interests, we've got no grounds for hope in that. So this is a time when we're reminded, as with global geopolitical matters developing out of local issues, we do need these larger global blocs to come and do their best work. The EU and America at their best can make a big difference.
Thank you very much for the insight, Professor Greg Barton on The Informer. Thank you, Greg.
Thank you, George.